In the opening scene, we see Cheryl Scott in the middle of a brutal 5,000-mile journey to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Exhausted, injured and starved of food, every bit of her wants to quit. But she can't. There's a flame burning within that's driving her on, the memory of her dead mum. This is a story of healing, determination and self-discovery. You see, 5 months ago, Cheryl's mother was suddenly diagnosed with terminal cancer, and not long after she passed away. Devastated, Cheryl's world crumbles to pieces. She becomes depressed and does anything she can to numb her excruciating pain. She drinks heavily, takes hard drugs, and sleeps with men who aren't her husband. But it doesn't work. Still haunted by vivid memories of the past, she finally decides to embark on a spiritual and physical journey to become a daughter her mother would be proud of again. Welcome to Blur Recaps. Tall Toast here and today. We'll be looking at the beautiful movie and true story called Wild. Seatbelts on, and let's begin. We now go back to the very first day of the journey. After hitchhiking a ride, Cheryl begins her trek in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. She stops briefly at the hiker's trail log and writes a short poem before continuing on. However, barely a couple of miles into her journey, she becomes tired and has to stop. She struggles to set up her tent for the first time and then starts writing a memoir to her mother, saying that she wants to quit already. The next morning, before setting off, she tries to prepare some food. However, she quickly realizes that she bought the wrong fuel type for her stove. She's unable to cook any food she brought with her. Over the next few days, she's forced to eat nothing but cold stew and raw nuts. Eventually, on the 8th day, she spots a farmer named Frank. Extremely hungry, she begs for him to help, and he eventually agrees. He graciously takes her back home to his family and they share a meal. He calls her journey crazy, and she says sometimes she feels like she is. As she's showering, we see a flashback of her and her ex-husband emotionally saying goodbye. They divorced after her cheating and drug-taking became too much. The next day, Frank drives her to pick up the correct gas, and she eventually sets back up on the trail. She leaves another poem at the trail log which reads, "Will you take me as I am? Will you?" Further along the trail, now 80 miles into her journey, she spots another hiker washing in the river. His name is Greg. They talk, and Greg tells her that he's also hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. However, he is currently walking around 20 miles a day, whereas Cheryl is only managing around 7. They agree to reconnect back at Kennedy Meadows, which is just a couple of days further ahead. Flashing back to the past again, Cheryl reveals to her best friend that she might be pregnant. However, she has no idea who the father might be. Her friend is furious and asks what her mother would think of who she's become. Cheryl becomes upset and hits a new low. After some time back in the present, she finally manages to make it to Kennedy Meadows. She's warmly welcomed by Greg and some of his friends. While she is there, a camper named Ed helps her strategically lighten her overweight backpack. Cheryl's best friend has also sent her provisions, along with some letters from her ex-husband Paul, who says he still has feelings for her and congratulates her on her progress so far. Later in the day, Ed tells Cheryl he's arranged to have her undersized hiking boots replaced at the next stop. Her feet have been bleeding with every step she takes. Greg advises her to bypass the snow-covered section and take a bus, but Cheryl insists she wants to hit her 5,000-mile goal. He simply tells her to add extra distance to her originally planned ending point and finish up at the Bridge of the Gods in Oregon instead. We then flash back to the past, where Cheryl's mum tells her to always follow her dreams in life and never give up, no matter how hard things get. Her mum was the North Star in her life and someone she could always go to whenever she was troubled. Following that, Cheryl is next seen taking a bus from Kennedy Meadows to a point around the mountains near Reno, Nevada, to continue the hike. She has to cross rivers and hike through snow up in the Sierra Mountains, but pushes on. On day 49, when she reaches the next stopping point on the trail, she is relieved to find her new boots waiting for her. She is also overjoyed to meet another woman hiking the trail, as there are so few of them. The woman, named Stacy Johnson, tells her that she met Greg along the way, who ultimately had to quit the hike before completing it. Cheryl is astonished to hear that she is still hiking when Greg, the experienced hiker, had to quit. Later, as Cheryl hikes across the deserts of Northern California, she reaches a water station, desperate to refill her bottles. However, the tank is empty, and Cheryl is left with nothing to drink. She manages to find a puddle of stagnant water filled with mosquitoes. She gets out her water filtration pump, adds an iodine tablet, and waits for the water to be treated and safe to drink. While she waits for the water to disinfect, 2 hunters approach and make suggestive remarks, leaving Cheryl feeling threatened and vulnerable. One returns later in the day, but leaves when his friend calls for him, so Cheryl runs until she is sure she is not being followed. At many of her darkest moments along the trail, Cheryl mysteriously encounters a red fox who she believes to be the protective spirit of her mother, safely guiding her along her journey. On the trail again, Cheryl crosses the Oregon state line and arrives in the small town of Ashland, which is filled with hikers and many hippie types. Cheryl leaves a store and encounters an attractive man who is handing out flyers for a concert. He approaches Cheryl, who tries to maintain her distance, likely due to her encounter with the hunters and the fact that she hasn't bathed in weeks. He gives her a flyer and tells her that he will put her name on the guest list for the event. Cheryl goes to a motel for the night, showers and makes herself up, heading to the show. The man brings her a drink and teases her about being unrecognizable now that she's all cleaned up. She goes home with him and sleeps with him. In the morning, she makes a phone call to Paul, leaving him a message. She tells him that she is sorry for all of the hurt that she has caused him. Another few days later, Cheryl hikes through the rain to reach another supply station at Mount Hood State Park, but the man who works there is closing up for the day. She begs him to reopen so she can get her package, which will contain fresh clothes and more supplies. The man says he will reopen for her if she promises to have a drink with him. She hesitantly agrees, and he reopens the mail office. As he is inside getting her package, 3 young hikers also enter the building. They recognize Cheryl as being the only woman who has been signing the trail logs with poems and repeat many of them back to her. Cheryl's package contains a letter from Paul, who tells her that he's so proud of her for making it this far, and he hopes she finds what she's looking for. At this point, she's walked over 1,000 miles. Cheryl enjoys hanging out with the young hikers that night as they all camp out. In the morning, they tell her she's been dubbed Wise Lady of the PCT Trail, since her poems and her notes left at the trail markers have become popular lore among the trail-goers. She seems to enjoy the nickname. On day 80, Cheryl is hiking through the woods when she encounters a llama, and an older woman and a young boy running up to her after their pack llama ran away. The little boy asks Cheryl about herself, and she tells him about her father who left her and her mother who recently died. The boy sings Cheryl a song. It takes her back in a flashback to the time when she was around his age, and we see that her dad would often become violent to her mum. She breaks down in tears at the thought not long after they leave. She continues on the trail and finally reaches the Bridge of the Gods. In a final voiceover, as she walks across the bridge, Cheryl talks about finally finishing the hike and ultimately remarrying and having 2 children of her own, naming one of them after her mother. She ponders whether she actually regrets the mistakes she's made, as it brought her to the place she is in her life now. As all of the memories of her family from the past flash back in her mind, she reveals that while she has lost a piece of her body and soul, she needs to live for the moment like her mom always told her.